So imagine, if you will, being a music executive back in the late 90s.
Oh man, what an era.
Right. And your whole job is to find the next, commercially viable, super radio-friendly rock band.
The next safe bet.
Exactly. So someone slides a demo tape across your desk, you hit play, and what comes out of the speakers is this completely unhinged blend of thrash metal, Middle Eastern folk scales, lyrical references to Charles Manson, and I kid you not, a literal Viennese waltz.
Which just sounds like a joke. Like the punchline to a very strange music industry joke.
It really does. You'd just be sitting there, trying to process this wall of sound, trying to figure out who on earth the target audience even is for something that chaotic.
Yeah, it's basically a recipe for like a deeply underground experimental band that plays exactly one show in a damp basement somewhere and is just never heard from again. It is the absolute antithesis of a safe bet.
But here is the sonic paradox we are exploring for you today on this deep dive. How does a band doing exactly that, breaking basically every fundamental rule of commercial marketability, somehow become one of the best-selling, most inescapable rock acts of the 21st century?
It completely defies all conventional logic, of how commercial music is supposed to work. Because as listeners, we typically like our genres neat.
Right.
We like our messages relatively simple to digest. And this band, they gave audiences absolutely none of that, yet they somehow managed to sell tens of millions of records.
It's wild. So today's mission is to unpack the artistic anomaly that is System of a Down. We have this massive stack of sources to help us figure out how four Armenian-American musicians from Los Angeles managed to completely bypass traditional musical categories.
We've got a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. We're pulling from an incredibly in-depth retrospective from the Italian music site On The Rock. We're also diving into some wildly passionate fan reviews and comment threads from Metalize.it.
Those are intense.
Oh, they're great. Plus, we're looking at a brilliant 2005 live concert review from the UK's The Guardian, and we're tracking their legacy through their official YouTube best-of track lists. We really want to understand how they created a legacy that is, equal parts terrifying, hilarious, and deeply socially conscious. Okay, let's unpack this.
So to really understand how they conquered the mainstream, we have to rewind to the environment that originally incubated them.
Yeah.
We need to look at the incredibly raw, unapologetic, and frankly bizarre way they started out, long before the platinum records and the stadium tours.
Because to even understand how a major label let them near a recording studio, you have to look at their scene. The year is 1995, we're in Los Angeles. The musical landscape is in this weird transition phase, and out of an earlier 1993 project called Soil, System of a Down officially forms.
Right, and you have these four guys, Serj Tankian, Darren Malakian, Shavo Odadjian, and John Dolmayan.
And crucially, all four members share Armenian heritage. And as the On The Rock retrospective points out, that heritage doesn't just sit in the background, right? It deeply influences the actual mechanics of their sound.
Yeah, it translates directly into the structural DNA of the song.
But what does that actually mean musically, though? How does Armenian heritage translate into heavy metal?
Well, think about standard Western rock and metal.
Yeah.
It's heavily based on the blues scale, right?
Sure, yeah.
It's very predictable to the Western ear. But System of a Down, they brought in these Middle Eastern folk scales. Musically, this means they're using specific half steps and interval jumps that sound almost serpentine or like wailing to someone raised entirely on American pop or classic rock.
Oh, wow.
It creates this instant sense of tension. And they aren't just adopting an exotic style for flair. That musical vocabulary is literally in their blood.
And that cultural foundation mixed with, heavy, distorted guitars is what makes their 1998 self-titled debut album so jarring. But they didn't just record this in a garage somewhere. They actually teamed up with the legendary producer Rick Rubin.
At Sound City Studios, no less.
Yeah. And you read about a mega producer like Rubin, and you just assume, oh, he's going to polish their sound for the radio. But the sources point out he did the exact opposite.
Totally. Rubin's entire philosophy is about stripping away the gloss. He doesn't build these heavily manufactured walls of sound with 100 digital layers.
Right.
He wants the essence of the artist sweating in the room. So instead of double-tracking every guitar part to make it artificially massive or auto-tuning the vocals, he used very minimal mixing tricks.
He captured this incredibly raw, aggressive live energy.
Exactly. When you listen to that first record, you can actually hear the string squeaks. You can hear the breaths. It feels slightly dangerous.
It feels like they're playing live right in front of you. And honestly, that sense of danger starts before you even hear the music. The album cover alone tells you you're in for something heavy, but not, standard heavy metal with skulls and fire.
No, not at all.
It's this stark, chilling, open hand on a completely black background. Our sources note that it was actually inspired by a 1928 anti-fascist poster by the artist John Heartfield.
Created for the German Communist Party, yeah.
Right, so it's this massive political statement just staring at you from the CD rack.
It operates as a visual warning label, basically.
Ah.
And the sonic whiplash inside absolutely delivers on that warning. The Italian reviewers on Metalize.it capture the experience of this debut perfectly, highlighting just the sheer unpredictability of the track list.
Whiplash is really the best way to describe it. You put the album on and you get a track like Sweet Pea, which is just hyper-aggressive. The guitars are down-tuned, it's fast, it's assaultive.
Very aggressive.
But then they pivot to a song like Sugar, which is strangely catchy. It has this bouncy, almost jazz-like bass line, even though the vocals are completely manic. And then there's People.
Ah, the infamous People.
I have to stop you there, because putting a literal Viennese waltz inside a metal song sounds like career suicide.
It really does.
I mean, a waltz is typically played in 34 time, conjuring images of like high-class 19th century ballrooms. To smash that together with distorted guitars and screaming, listening to it, is like driving a high-performance sports car with a manual transmission and the driver just decides to shift from fifth gear straight into reverse.
That's a great analogy.
It's thrilling, but it is deeply disorienting. Were they actively trying to alienate people? Because on paper, this sounds like intentional self-sabotage to avoid becoming famous.
What's fascinating here is that it wasn't sabotage at all. It was extreme authenticity.
Really?
Yeah, that dissonance you're describing, that fifth gear to reverse feeling, that is the whole point of their art. Think about what a waltz represents. High society, order, tradition.
Right, right.
By corrupting that structure with heavy, detuned metal and erratic vocals, they're creating a sonic metaphor for social decay and the hypocrisy of the elite. They were exploring incredibly chaotic social and political themes, and they needed a musical structure that actually mirrored that chaos.
That makes so much sense. But because their debut was so musically erratic and loaded with these bizarre choices, it sparked a massive identity crisis for anyone trying to categorize them.
Oh, the gatekeeping was intense.
It was! You can see this friction playing out in real time in the comments section of Metalize.it. It is both hilarious and intense. You have these deeply passionate Italian metalheads aggressively typing at each other, fiercely debating what genre this band actually belongs to.
Because nobody knew what box to put them in.
Exactly. Some fans just lump them into the new metal craze of the late 90s, throwing them in the same bucket as bands like Korn and Limp Bizkit.
Which, if you only look at the calendar, kind of makes sense. They emerged at the exact same time. They occasionally toured with those bands, and they did share a certain rhythmic, syncopated bounce in their guitar riffs that was super popular in nu metal back then.
Yes, but then you read further down the comment thread, and you have other fans violently rejecting that label. They are arguing that calling System of a Down nu metal is an outright insult.
Right.
They classify them as crossover or alternative metal, pointing to their avant-garde weirdness and comparing them way more to an experimental band like Faith No More.
And the mechanism driving that fierce debate, the reason they resist standard metal classification, really mostly comes down to the vocal dynamic.
It's so unique.
Entirely unique in the genre. You have Serj Tankian, the lead vocalist, who doesn't just sing, he practically acts out different characters. He has this incredible elastic range.
Yeah, he really does.
He can deliver guttural death metal growls that rattle your speakers, but in the exact same breath, he can jump to soaring, operatic melodies, or these strange spoken word whispers.
He sounds like a deranged prophet screaming on a street corner one second and then a highly trained choir boy the next.
Exactly.
And then, as if that wasn't enough, you have the guitarist Danon Malakian providing backing vocals, but he's not doing, pretty harmonies. He's delivering these schizoid, aggressive, almost punk rock shouts. The contrast is wild.
It really is.
But if I'm a listener who typically hates heavy metal if the screaming and the fast guitars just aren't for me, why should I care about a band that triggers this kind of intense, nerdy gatekeeping?
You should care because it connects directly to how we all synthesize complex information.
Yeah.
System of a Down's inability to be neatly categorized forces active engagement.
Okay.
When a piece of art, or honestly any new information, doesn't fit into our pre-existing mental boxes, it forces our brains to wake up. If they sound exactly like Korn, you could just say, oh, it's nu metal, I know what that is, and mentally check out.
Right, you just put it on in the background.
Exactly. By constantly pulling the rug out from under your expectations, like dropping a waltz into a heavy riff, they refuse to let you do that. You actually have to listen to the structure.
And instead of alienating the mainstream with that refusal to pick a lane, that exact unclassifiable weirdness is actually what launched them to global superstardom.
It's incredible.
We hit 2001 and they dropped their second album, Toxicity. And instead of just being a niche underground hit, it is a global explosion.
Toxicity is such a fascinating cultural artifact because it represents a massive leap forward in songwriting. As Otterock points out, they somehow managed to synthesize entirely opposing musical philosophies here.
Yeah, they really did.
They took the melodic, memorable sensibilities of the Beatles, combined it with the sprawling, atmospheric ambition of Pink Floyd, and then injected it all with the sheer velocity and aggression of thrash metal.
The track list on Toxicity reads like a greatest hits album right out of the gate.
Yep.
You have the frantic, stuttering brilliance of Chop Suey, which has this rapid-fire vocal delivery that became a massive mainstream hit.
An absolute anthem.
Then you have the blunt, systemic critique of Prison Song, which actually opens with a whispered statistic about the prison industrial complex before just exploding.
Right.
You have a song called ATWA, which explores Charles Manson's environmental philosophy. And then you have Psycho, which relies on this heavy, repetitive bass groove to talk about cocaine-addicted groupies.
And amidst all that heavy thematic darkness, prisons, cult leaders, addiction, they still managed to pull the rug out from under you with the instrumentation itself. At the very end of the album, they include a hidden track called Arto.
Featuring the Armenian avant-garde musician Arto Tankpoyashian. And wait, let's talk about the instrumentation here. They are at the absolute height of their commercial power. They have a massive major label studio budget.
Right.
And what does Arto play on this hidden track?
He plays these complex tribal rhythms, but not on a pristine, custom-made drum kit. He's playing percussion on an empty Coca-Cola bottle and a plastic water jug.
They literally use pieces of trash.
Exactly. And that choice is profound, you know? By stripping away the artifice of big-budget rock production and ending a multi-platinum metal album with a Coke bottle percussion solo, they are grounding the music back in raw human expression.
It's brilliant.
It is a brilliant flex of artistic freedom. It essentially says, we don't need million-dollar equipment to make you feel something.
And they took that momentum and just ran with it. In 2002, they released an outtake collection called Steal This Album, which incredibly sounded more cohesive than most bands' primary releases.
Yeah, the outtakes were better than most singles.
And then they hit their absolute commercial peak in 2005. They released a massive double album project, Mesmerize and Hypnotize, released 6 months apart. Let's talk about the data here because the numbers are just absurd.
Mesmerize alone sold 800,000 physical copies in its first week in the United States.
Wow.
800,000 albums in 7 days. For a band that utilizes Middle Eastern scales and screams about the prison industrial complex, those mainstream retail numbers are staggering.
The 2005 Guardian review by Caroline Sullivan captures this peak era beautifully. She's reviewing their live show at the Brixton Academy in London, and she paints this incredible picture of the room. She actually describes Serj Tankian as nu metal's best Billy Connolly lookalike.
It's such a vivid image. You picture him up there, perhaps in a serious frock coat, with his wild hair and beard, looking deeply intense, but also slightly absurd, just commanding this massive crowd.
But beyond his look, she notes the actual mechanics of the show. She observes how the band perfectly veers between the hysteria of heavy rock and the passion of Armenian folk music. They brought this deeply ethnic, historic passion to thousands of British kids sweating in a London venue.
It was a true crossover moment.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the lead single from Mesmerize, a song called BYOB, which stands for Bring Your Own Bombs. It is a scathing anti-war track, specifically targeting the ignorance of youth party culture while the world burns.
The recurring scream in the chorus is literally, why do they always send the poor? It is a blunt indictment of who actually fights and dies in wars.
Right. But here's the mechanism of the irony. The verses have this furious thrash beat, but then it transitions into this incredibly infectious, bouncy, almost danceable rhythm. Because of that rhythm, BYOB became a massive mainstream party anthem.
It really did.
It was played at college frat parties. How on earth does a band handle the cognitive dissonance of looking out at a crowd of millions of people jumping up and down, happily moshing to a message they are likely completely ignoring?
It is the ultimate double-edged sword of writing a catchy hook. But from the band's perspective, they understand human psychology. The melody is the bait. Think about the Trojan horse.
Okay, yeah.
If they wrote a droning, unlistenable dirge about the horrors of the military-industrial complex, the only people who would listen are the activists who already agree with them.
They'd just be preaching to the choir.
Precisely. The pop metal hooks are the wooden horse. It's shiny, it's familiar, the rhythm makes your brain want to let it inside. But once that bouncy chorus gets stuck in your head, the trapdoor opens. Suddenly, you are humming lyrics about geopolitical violence while walking down the street.
Wow.
They are more than willing to accept the irony of a frat house partying to BYOB if it means the core message eventually seeps into the cultural subconscious of a generation.
That irony, that immense tension between their massive, radio-friendly commercial sound and their incredibly heavy, uncomfortable subject matter leads us directly to the core why of the band's existence. Because beyond the noise and the platinum records, System of a Down is ultimately defined by their relentless activism.
It really is their foundation.
And as we unpack this, just as a quick note for you listening, we're impartially reporting on these viewpoints, like the anti-war stuff, directly from the sources. We're not taking any political sides here.
Right, exactly. We're not endorsing the band's views, just trying to convey the ideas that are in the material.
Exactly. So whether you agree with their specific politics or not, you really have to admire the sheer audacity of hiding such heavy geopolitical critiques inside stadium rock anthems.
It's a total masterclass in subversion.
It is. With that context established, we have to look at how deeply their Armenian heritage informs this mission as activists. This wasn't like a phase they grew into after they got rich. It was baked in from day one. Look at the track PLUCK from their very first album. That song is directly dedicated to the victims of the 1915 Armenian genocide.
For them, heavy metal wasn't just a vehicle to express standard teenage angst or rebellion against parents. It was a vessel for generational trauma.
Yeah.
Heavy metal, with its inherent aggression and sheer volume, provided the perfect sonic vehicle to force a loud, unavoidable conversation about a historical atrocity that they felt the global community had largely ignored or actively denied.
And that mission hasn't faded over time. In fact, if we bring the timeline right up to the present using the official YouTube source material, we see that activism remains their sole driving force. The band actually went on a notoriously long hiatus from recording new music. Years went by with absolutely nothing.
A really long time.
But in 2020, they finally reunited and went back into the studio to release 2 brand new tracks, Protect the Land and Genocidal Humanoids.
And it is incredibly telling that what finally brought them back to the studio wasn't like a lucrative multi-million-dollar reunion tour offer or a record label demanding a new product.
Right.
It was a humanitarian crisis. They released those 2 tracks as direct fundraisers to raise global awareness and crucial financial support for Armenia during a time of intense real-world regional conflict.
It wasn't about the music industry anymore. It was purely about the mission.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what System of a Down actually achieved over their career is kind of astonishing. They built that massive Trojan horse out of highly energetic, incredibly catchy pop metal structures. They got the entire world to invite this horse inside the gates because it sounded so thrilling, so completely unique compared to everything else on the radio.
And once it was inside, they opened the trapdoor and unleashed all this deep political critique, historical trauma, and fierce activism directly into the mainstream. They completely weaponized their own popularity for awareness.
They absolutely did.
They used the fundamental mechanics of mainstream pop culture catchy choruses, music videos, stadium tours to actively subvert mainstream pop culture. So what does this all mean?
It's a big question.
When we look back at this massive stack of sources today, the frantic reviews from Italy, the confused genre debates about new metal versus alternative, the live shows at Brixton Academy, the ultimate lesson from System of a Down isn't just a tutorial on how to make loud, heavy music. It is a masterclass in how combining wildly disparate, seemingly contradictory elements can create something entirely unprecedented.
They proved empirically that you can put a Coke bottle percussion track, a Viennese waltz, and thrash metal guitars into the exact same blender, and instead of just getting a mess of unlistenable noise, you get a global movement.
It is a massive reminder that true innovation, the kind of art that actually shifts culture and forces people to pay attention, almost always looks like absolute chaos at first glance. It looks like a car shifting from 5th gear straight into reverse.
Which leaves us with something very important to consider. System of a Down used aggressive, dissonant music to jolt audiences awake. They force the mainstream to engage with uncomfortable historical and political realities by making the music itself impossible to ignore. But we live in a drastically different media landscape today. Back in 2001, you might stumble across a bizarre music video on MTV and be forced to reckon with it. Today, everything is hyper-curated by algorithms perfectly designed to feed us exactly what we want to hear. These systems ensure we are never startled, never jarred, and never pushed outside of our sonic or ideological comfort zones.
We are entirely insulated from the whiplash. The algorithms smooth out all the edges.
Precisely. So the question we leave you with is this. In an era of algorithmically smoothed-out culture, where is the modern equivalent of that artistic dissonance? What is currently forcing us out of our comfort zones to confront the uncomfortable realities we would much rather ignore? And if that jarring, unpredictable voice is currently missing from the cultural landscape, what are we losing without it?
Keep an ear out for the waltz hidden in the noise. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.